Kelda, lovely to see you. So today we're going to talk about that very well-known subject of fear. And I guess I'm going to start us off with a question. So what does fear mean to you? You're somebody who I look at that has no fear. Done things that I am absolutely scared of myself, and so really in awe of you. So yeah, what does fear mean to you, Kelda?
Do you know, it is kind of almost so funny that you say that, because I think we all have fears. No matter what we're doing, I might not be fearful of doing a climb or taking on a challenge, but there are other really big fears, and I think for everyone, well, no, that's probably a bit of a sweeping statement, but for a lot of us, certainly for me, fear is about that fear of failure. It's not actually a fear in doing something, or a fear of heights, or a fear of water, or it's that fear of failure. And whatever we're doing, and for me, whether it's rowing the Atlantic or that Olympic gold medal or climbing a mountain, the thing that can so often stop us from trying in the first place is that fear of failure. And we don't want to either fail ourselves or be seen to fail in front of other people. So that, I guess, that would be my concept of fear. That's what my biggest fear is. But I think it's different from everyone. So I'm going to kind of put the question back at you, Rachel, because what would be your concept of fear?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was just thinking as you were talking, okay, so what am I afraid of? And is it failure or is it actual stuff? And it just reminded me of this book that I read. It's called Playing Big by Tara Moore, actually. And she talks about fear. I think it's in the Latin language having two words. So there's two different types of fear. And one is this fear of almost things that might never happen. So I'm going to be afraid because I'm on an aeroplane and it might just suddenly hit a mountain. So most of the time it's an irrational fear. It probably isn't going to happen. And then the other fear is the fear of that you feel when you're stepping into a space that feels bigger than you. And yeah, so for me, fear, it is probably fear of failure, because it's a fear of maybe I should be able to do that, but I'm not. So I think when I feel afraid of things, I often do them, and if I don't do them, I beat myself up. So if I'm afraid of driving in really bad weather, there's times when I haven't done it and I've literally rung my husband and said, you have to come and get me wherever I am. And then I've just felt horrendous. And then there's times when I have done it and I've got this real adrenaline and I feel like, yeah, I can do things. So yeah.
I'm sort of smiling because as you're talking, Rachel, it reminded me of a quote. I've got it written on one of my boards in the office to remind me. And it says, make your choices on your hopes, not your fears. And that's huge, because so often the choices we make are around the fear of failure. I'm not going to do that because that might happen. So you're basing your choice on your fear, instead of going, I'm going to do that because that might happen, which is based on your hopes. And I've used it a lot in coaching, in that when people are talking about what's stopping them from doing things, and just by making them aware, so are you basing that choice on your hopes or your fears? So what would your choice be if you were making it around what you hoped would happen rather than what you feared would happen? That's huge. When you start having that sort of perception, it can really change how you approach things. And one of the other things, this is so relevant actually, and it changed. I can tell you a little story around this. But I was reading a book and one line stood out to me, and it said, what would you do if you absolutely knew you couldn't fail? Now, I was about to go on a first date. And I'll be honest with you, I was going into that kind of saying, what's the point? Never works out. You know, they're always idiots. Like, why am I even bothering? I'm really busy. Why am I doing this? You know, and they're like, hang on a minute, Helga. Just apply that. What would you do if you absolutely knew you couldn't fail? So I thought, if I knew that this was going to work out, that I was going to have a great day, and that I'd be excited, you know, I'd be looking forward to it. And so I decided to go with that attitude. And do you know what? We had a great time. We're still together now. And I'm not saying it's because of that. You know, reality is we don't know. But we give ourselves the best chance of success, because I went relaxed, smiley, happy, looking for it being a good day, which goes back to our Google search bar podcast, instead of thinking, this is going to be terrible, he's going to be an idiot, why have I bothered? Because if I went thinking that that's what I'd look for, that's what I'd see, that's the vibe I would give out. So in going thinking this will be a success, you give yourself the best chance. And this book also says that the disappointment is no worse whether we plan for success or we plan for failure. Actually, the disappointment, the level of disappointment or hurt or whatever it might be, is the same. But if we allow ourselves to believe it's going to work, we can enjoy the journey rather than feeling nervous or anxious or miserable about it. And if we enjoy the journey, we instantly increase our chances of success. So I found that one line really, really powerful. What would you do if you absolutely knew you couldn't fail? And that's just, it's a different perspective to I think how we naturally, it's always, I'll protect myself, I won't dream about it going right, and then I won't be upset if it doesn't. But you know, actually that's just not true, because we're lessening our chances of it going right by thinking like that.
Absolutely. Wow, there's so much wisdom in that. I just need to ask from listeners' point of view, what is the name of the book? Can you?
So it's a book called How to Avoid a Near-Life Experience, by a guy called Steve Head. And you know what? I couldn't recommend it high enough, as far as it's very simple, it's very readable, just very manageable chunks to read and absorb. And he comes out with some absolutely amazing one-liners like that I think you can just remember and apply, and it can change. Sounds melodramatic to say it can change your life, but you know what, sometimes those one-liners can, you know. So I was very grateful for it, because now I'm in a relationship and I wasn't. So
brilliant. And that's actually really facing your fears. It is most vulnerable, actually, if you do think about relationships.
Yeah. So
what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I'm wondering, how is that? What else has that helped you do? Is there anything else?
So I guess that's a really interesting one, as far as I only read that book at the start of this year. So it's almost quite a new concept for me. And when I got that line, I thought, I wish I'd had that before I rode the Atlantic. Because coming back to that fear of failure, you know, one of the big things that hit me in those couple of weeks leading up to the Atlantic Row was, what if I fail? And because a lot of people were watching it and following it, that fear of failure was overwhelming, to the point that I nearly didn't start, you know, because I felt like there was too many people watching and I'd be so humiliated if I didn't complete it. But a really interesting story around that as well. There was one, it was a Porthmadog rowing club, and they'd been huge supporters of me. They'd done a lot of fundraising and they'd helped me a lot getting out on the sea. And you know, those couple of weeks leading up to it, where I was contemplating not doing it, and I actually voiced my concerns to the sort of main man who'd been helping me with that. And he turned around and he said, Kelda, no one would think any the less of you if you didn't complete it. And what that taught me was actually it was being brave enough to try. That was what mattered. So actually, as long as I was brave enough to put myself out there and give it a go and give it my best, no one would hold it against me if I failed. Where it would have mattered is if I wasn't brave enough to put myself out there in the first place, you know. So actually that was a massive learning. And whatever it is, it doesn't have to be something as huge as rowing the Atlantic, whether it's going for a job or whether it's applying to uni or entering into a relationship, you know, if you're brave enough to try. And I always stop myself when I say brave enough to try, because I think it's about being brave enough to try your best, because just trying isn't enough. Trying your best absolutely is. And if I look at the Paralympics, you know, that was a failure. I didn't get selected for Rio. I didn't win a gold medal. But do I feel like I failed? No, I don't. Because I can look at that and say, I know I gave my best to every single training session. I committed to it wholeheartedly. In that final selection regatta, I hit a personal best. I paddled the fastest I've ever paddled. The fact that someone else paddled faster than me was out of my control, but I did the best I could. So it was a success. I failed in my ultimate goal, but it wasn't a failure. And that, I think, can give us a lot of confidence to be prepared to try, because as long as we can, hand on heart, say, right, I'm going to try, I'm going to give this my best. If I achieve it, fantastic. If I don't, I still know I've given it my best, and what have I learned from it? Which is the huge thing that's probably like the next thing to talk about, because Nelson Mandela's quote, I've got it at the bottom of my stairs: I never lose, I either win or I learn. So, success is great, but learn from success too. But more importantly, learn from your failures. And then it's just a learning.
Yeah, it's interesting. So what you're making me think about is that when we're deciding to do something and fear sort of gets into our thinking, we tend to look at the outcome, not the process of doing it. So we tend to be, maybe thinking about that as an end point, rather than, well, am I afraid of the first step in this journey? No.
Yes.
Just I'm afraid of the whole thing, or I'm afraid of what might happen if I didn't.
Yeah. And I guess that's so relevant to a lot of the other things we've talked about, from that manageable chunks, and whether that's a job interview or a relationship or whatever it might be, okay, well, what's the first step? Well, let's deal with that instead of looking at the end product, And I think you said something else really interesting there, Rachel, as far as part of the journey, because we talked about the sat nav analogy, and that life is like a sat nav, and you go on your journey, but twists and turns and hold ups and change of direction can happen. And I was actually having a conversation with a young person fairly recently who, they weren't happy in the job they were doing, but they were scared that if they quit and did something else and it wasn't right, that they would end up sort of in a worse position. But we chatted around how, actually, as long as you're moving, even if you move and something doesn't work out, learn from it and move on again. And I actually talked around the many times that I've gone in directions that haven't worked out, and there were lots of them. The more I talked about it, the more I realized it happened. But actually it was okay, because it led on to something else. So yes, it's scary. It is scary to make changes, and there is the what ifs, but actually, if you learn, it actually doesn't matter if it works out or it doesn't. You can just allow it to become part of your journey, and it can lead you onto something else. And as long as you keep moving, it will eventually lead on to the right thing. And it's all those wrong turnings or mistakes or failures, whatever you want to call them, that actually enable you to gather the learnings to then know when things are right. And that can take away a lot of the fear, in the fact that it's okay. It's okay if it doesn't work out. It's okay if I don't achieve it, because I'll learn from it, and that will give me the tools to realize when things are right and to work out what I want. And that's quite liberating. And I loved your relationship with fear, because you can see fear as a bad thing and something to shy away from, or actually you can see fear as a good thing, because that means that's when I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm moving, and I'm gathering information about what I want. And it's a really interesting concept that it's our perception of fear, isn't it? And instead of perceiving fear to be a bad thing and something we should avoid, maybe it's looking at fear as something that's really good and empowering, and let's embrace it instead.
Definitely. I heard I heard Dame Judi Dench talk about this, and it's stuck with me forever. That so often fear shows up as a feeling, and that feeling of feeling nervous, scared, sick in your stomach, butterflies, is exactly the same as the feeling when we feel excited.
Yes.
So those two are very similar, and yet, one of them we define as fear, and one of them we define as excitement, which comes back to your hopes and choices.
Yes. Yes.
But I always remember Dame Judi Dench saying that when she felt that feeling, instead of running away from it, she realized it's like the petrol for my tank. It's like, thank goodness, I must be onto something.
Yeah.
And so it's like for us to be the best that we can be, and we don't even know what's possible, what we're capable of.
Yep.
The only way of finding that out is by getting more comfortable with that feeling of excitement, I'm going to call it, rather than fear.
Yes. And we had a bit of a chat about this before, Rachel, because I do also believe that there are some things that it's okay to accept you are fearful of, and if it's not holding you back in life, if it's not causing you a major problem, that's okay. And the example I would give is, when I was hit by the lorry, when I was out exercising my horse, and my horse was killed. So he shied at a plastic bag in the hedge, shied out into the middle of the road, and a lorry was coming past us too fast to stop and hit us. And I now have an absolute fear of riding on main roads. And if a lorry comes past me, I will have a complete heebie-jeebie, to the point that I will not, and I don't want to, ride on main roads. Now, if that fear was stopping me from achieving a goal that was really important to me, so if I still wanted to be an Olympic event rider, and I had to ride down the main road to get to the place where I train my horse, I would want to work harder at overcoming that. As it is, it's not. I get no pleasure at all out of riding down a main road, so I'm happy to accept that fear, and not ride down a main road. So I think, sometimes when we've had maybe traumas happen, I'm actually thinking about the guys at the Manchester Arena bombing, so a lot of those young people understandably have a fear of going to a music concert now. A lot of them have been incredibly brave and have gone back and overcome it. Some haven't. But I think if that fear is so overriding that it's not giving them any pleasure at all, and they don't want to overcome it, and it's not holding them back, it's not causing their life to stop because they're not, then actually that's fine. Just listen to music, through your phone rather than going to a concert. If it's upsetting you because you really want to go to a concert, cool, well, let's look at overcoming it. But sometimes it's okay to have a fear.
I really agree with that, Kelda, and I think sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. I should be able to do this. Everyone thinks I should, and then other people put pressure on us. So I, on a very, nothing like the Manchester Arena bombings, but just my fear of fairground rides. If you're there, you get a lot of pressure. Come on, you'll be fine. It's like, yeah, but I don't get any pleasure out of it. It's not really going to change my life whether I go on this or not. It's just going to make you feel happier. And so it's being strong enough to just say, actually, I'm making a choice that's, yes, I might be afraid, but that's not the only reason why I'm not doing it. It's just not the thing that floats my boat, or I don't need it right now.
I've come up with a new little thing since we last spoke, Rachel, and I quite like this. It's a 3 A's, and the 3 A's are acknowledge, accept, and action. And it's kind of relevant in this situation because, to me, the acknowledge is so for me with being hit by the lorry on the road, acknowledge that I have a fear. And it's a perfectly genuine fear because I got hit by a lorry and my horse got killed. So it's understandable that I have got a fear of riding on the main road, so acknowledge it. It's okay to feel scared because it happened. The accept is accepting that it happened. You can't change that. It's out of your control. It's part of my journey. So there's nothing I can do about what happened. So I have to just accept that is part of me. And then the action is, well, what am I going to do about it? Now, for me, the action is, if that was holding back my life, okay, I've got to work out how I can take steps in overcoming this. Or how can I get to the arena where I'm going to train my horse going across the fields rather than down the main road? So what action can I take? Or maybe the action is, I'm okay with that. So I'm just not going to ride down main roads, and I'm going to go and just ride around the fields instead. That's the action I'm going to take. And you really can apply that to any situation. If we look at Manchester bombing, acknowledge, I'm right to feel scared because something horrendous happened. Accepting, it was horrendous, it's part of me, so I'm going to accept that I have got this fear and there's a reason for it. Action, what am I going to do about it? Do I want to overcome it, or am I happy not going to concerts anymore? So I think breaking it down with those it really takes the pressure off, because allowing yourself to acknowledge that there's a reason for your fear and allowing yourself to accept that that's okay, can be quite liberating. And then it's like, okay, and what's the action? So you're taking control of the situation rather than the fear controlling you.
And basically you're making a choice, so you are in control as opposed to the fear making the choice.
Yes.
I can think that things that I'm afraid of, maybe flying, a lot of the time I might make a choice, well, we'll just get the train, and in the back of my mind I'm going, yeah, but actually I should just be flying because that would be quicker, or whatever it is.
But if you look at your fairground ride, actually if you make the choice that you actually just don't want to go, it's no big deal, I just don't want to go on that fairground ride, so you go and enjoy it, I'll stand here and take the photos of you screaming as you come past, and then we're all going to have some candy floss afterwards, and I'm happy with that. And then it's not that you failed because you've been too scared to get on. You've made the choice not to, because it's not going to be of any benefit. You're not going to enjoy it. So save your money and go spend it on candy floss that you will enjoy,
It does link a little bit to connection. Like, well, if I want to connect with people or my peers or my friends, maybe I should be doing this, or maybe, so I guess we've got to be careful that it's who are we doing it for? Is it for others or ourselves?
Yeah.
Overcoming the fear for? Is it we're overcoming it to make everyone else like us more or whatever, maybe that's not the reason. But if it's because we think we'll grow, and like you said, it's going to help us with what we hope might happen in the future, then it's worth overcoming.
And that's back to control, really, isn't it? You're taking control. You know, you're making the choices, you're making the decisions, and straight away that's when fear can become empowering rather than limiting. You know, one of the things I wanted to add in, Rachel, because I think it's really important, and it's back to that fear of failure, because there's an analogy, not an analogy, an acronym, that's the word I'm thinking of. If you break down the word fail, for me, fail stands for first attempt in learning. And so actually that's back to the Nelson Mandela quote, really. You know, if you actually try something and you don't achieve it, okay, what have you learned? That's my first attempt in learning. What have I learned? What can I do differently next time to give me a better chance of success? And you know what? If you try again and you fail again, that's just a further attempt in learning. And so I don't see failure as failure. I see failure as an opportunity to learn. And then it takes away the fear, because you don't have to be scared of it. It can just be something to enable you to learn and grow, and that's quite empowering as well.
Definitely. And I think, you know, I can hear myself thinking, well, how many times do I fail before I decide, you know, this is no longer learning, that you're just no good at this, or you can't do this, and will I be able to cope with that?
Yeah.
And I guess my response just for myself is, actually, it doesn't matter how many times you fail, does it? Because you succeeded by trying. But
you know, I often say it to young people who come on our Climbing Out programs, and let's say, you know, they don't want to do the abseil, and I'll say, well, have you ever done it before? No. Okay, well, try it. If your learning from today is that I never want to do an abseil again, that's absolutely fine, you know. But if you don't try it, you will never know. So I think sometimes if you fail, you know, some young people, they've got to that edge of the abseil and they haven't been able to get over. But do you know what? Hats off to them, because they've been brave enough to get up there and try. Their learning is, no, I definitely don't like abseiling. You know, cool, brilliant. You don't ever have to waste any energy on worrying whether you should or shouldn't do it again, because your learning is you don't like it. You know, and that's okay. So it's back to that learning. That's not that they failed to do the abseil. They just learn that abseiling's not for them. And that's great, because they don't have to waste time and energy on it in the future. So, you know, it's kind of, reality is sometimes we don't like something, or we're not good enough. You know, I failed to get to Rio, and then I got kicked off the squad because I wasn't fast enough, you know. So yeah, I did fail, but reality was I wasn't fast enough, and that's life, and I just had to suck that one up, you know. So you learn from it and you move on.
And it's how we define it, isn't it? I'm just coming back to your abseiling. If we've said, well, what we're aiming to do today is abseil down this mountain, and I get to the edge and I don't do it, I'm going to think I've failed. If we say what we're going to do today is learn about how we can cope with the opportunity of abseiling, you know, how far we can go.
Yes.
What's our comfort zone edge?
Yes.
And we're going to look at it a bit differently. Okay, I got as far as that. Whereas if I'm thinking about the end result, I'm always going to fail because I've never quite made it.
Yeah, and that's back to what you said about when we focus on the outcome, isn't it, rather than one step at a time, which is a really interesting way of looking at it, because whatever goal you set yourself, if all you're focused on is the outcome, then maybe we do set ourselves up for a bit more failure. But if we break it down, you know, that job interview, actually, I need to prepare for it well. I need to make sure my shirt's ironed. I need to make sure there's no flat tires on the car in the morning, so I miss the interview, you know, all those things where you're just breaking it down into chunks. And I always say it with job interviews, you could be the most amazing candidate and do a brilliant interview, but if there's someone else that's been working for the company for years, they really like them, and they're best mates with the boss, you know, it may be out of your control whether you get the job or not, but it's back to being the best you can be.
Yeah, and when I talk about job interviews, I always say, if you show up and you're yourself and you're able to share everything that you already know and your experiences, and you don't get the job, then you don't need to beat yourself up, because it wasn't about you. It was about, they wanted somebody different. They wanted some different skills. Whereas if I show up and I haven't given everything of me, then I beat myself up, because maybe I'd have got the job had I been more myself, or had I shared this or that.
But I'm going to challenge you slightly on that, Rachel, because even when you say there about beating yourself up, I would say, okay, what's your learning? Because what are you going to do next time differently so that you don't make that mistake again? You know, and that's where I think, okay, so I didn't prepare myself in the best way. What am I going to do differently? What am I going to do at the next job interview to make sure I don't let that happen again? And you know, it's back to, if we talk about simple computers, you know, your computer may have a bit of fear in there around job interviews because you know, it went wrong that time and you didn't get the job. But if you've learned from it and you apply it next time, then that fear doesn't have to stop you the next time, because you've put plans in place to stop that from happening again.
Absolutely, Kelda. And I think the thing is that sometimes, coming back to your acceptance thing, sometimes that job wasn't right for you, and thank goodness you didn't get it.
Yeah.
So don't beat yourself up, and move on to the one that might be right in the future.
Yeah.
So Kelda, let's bring this to a bit of a close. What's your takeaway from today? What are the key points from your perspective?
You know, I think for me, what's been really interesting in chatting is that perception of what's your relationship with fear, and instead of seeing it as something to shy away from, you know, actually seeing it something to embrace. Because if you're feeling fearful, you know, that's when it's an opportunity to learn and grow and develop. But also, I think a huge sort of driver for people, or limitation for people, is that fear of failure. But actually, if you're brave enough to try, and when you try your best, then it's back to not seeing failure as failure. It's an opportunity to learn, and that if you've been the best you can be, then you can still be proud whether you've succeeded or failed. And of course, that little one of, what would you do if you absolutely knew you could not fail?
Yeah. And I feel like we should ask ourselves that every day. You know, that maybe that question in itself just makes us rise to something, a better version of ourselves, or makes us almost think about the potential that we could achieve.
Yeah, and that's, you know, even as you sit there and say it, it kind of makes you excited about the day rather than fearful of it, because it's kind of like, great, what am I going to achieve today? Which is a great way to get up in the morning, I reckon.
Yeah, thank you so much. Doesn't matter how often I hear that, you have to keep reminding yourself, don't you? So thank you. Kelda, it's been an absolute pleasure to see you again, and
you.
Look forward as ever to next time, but have a good day today.
You too. Thanks, Rachel.
Bye.